So we're finally at the Hall of Faith, right? I mean, it's like we're in the home stretch now. Like when you get to this, this is like something that you've probably heard many sermons on, or you've heard a lot of citations from it. Especially the first part of it, where it says that faith is the no, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And
Substance, not the absence.
not the absence, no. Hopefully not the absence. And so, and a lot of times, like you're jumping into that, because somebody's doing a sermon on healing, or even could be a name it and claim it sort of thing. And so we're going to like look at that. But I think that especially if you've spent like the last 10 chapters with us, it'd be kind of an awkward thing to jump from, don't fall away from the faith. And, it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. But we're not the kind of people who hold back and, endure the suffering that you're going to face and those sorts of things. And then suddenly jump to kind of a name it and claim it sort of a thing, because it's just not the context of Hebrews 11. And it's not the context of what the writer is talking about. He's talking about a life of faith. So where we left off in chapter 10 is that, first he writes about those things, that, if we keep on willfully sinning, and there's nothing beyond Christ that you can look to and to return to. And basically, if you don't stay true to that covenant, you're screwed, because there's nothing better and there's nothing more. He's the real thing. Where else would you go? And so all that's left is a fearful expectation of the judgment, and then he exhorts them. He says, but recall the former days when, after you were enlightened, and I'm here at the end of chapter 10, after you were enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction, and sometimes being partners with those so treated. For you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property. Imagine the Romans coming into your home and taking what you have, or maybe the Judaizers, or I don't know. Since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one. Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward, for you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised. For yet in a little while, the coming one will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. And a lot of times when we hear that verse, but my righteous one will live by faith, or the righteous will live by faith, we hear it talked about as if somebody's saying that the righteous will have faith. If you have faith, that's what makes you righteous, And I think that it was part of, it was Martin Luther really who really discovered that in scripture and nailed his thesis, like opposing the church, or it was the Catholic Church, because Martin Luther was a Catholic monk. But he was, we're doing all these things, and really it's all about faith, right? But I think it's been watered down to in such a way that, it's come across like, as long as you have these things in your head, as long as and we get stuck on just believing, right? As long as you have a belief in God, or, like it's a mental assent, or, and that sort of thing, that's why you are righteous. And it's only part of the picture. Yes, Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. We know that, and that's something that the writer of Hebrews has brought up. But what he's also brought up is that, you know, you're going to live by this faith, and that's why I put this in bold, right? You live by faith. Live by faith isn't just having faith, you know, in the sense that we look at that. And we've seen that the same word that we use for faith that we have is basically the same set of words when we're talking about Jesus being faithful. And so even in English, the word faith and faithful are interconnected. You know, if you think faith, you think of something that you believe or that you see. If you think faithful, well, that's something you do, and that's something that you have to have endurance to do, and that's something that you start with a belief, but it carries on further. To be faithful means that you've taken that faith and that you've actually done something with it, or that you've carried it out, and that you've been true to it for a while. So those are ideas that all kind of like go hand in hand, and this is the big picture that you get from Hebrews, you know. So, and the second part there, it says, my soul takes no pleasure in anyone who shrinks back. So it's you know, it's not about, you know, I think a lot of times we understand that, yes, God is very kind to the prodigal who comes back and stuff like that, you know. But we diminish the what kind of a tragedy it is to walk away from your faith, you know. And I did that myself, you know, in my late teens, early 20s, and for a while it was kind of like my testimony. Later on, I kind of learned not to. I don't talk about it the same way that I used to, you know, because sometimes I would, you know, because I realized that, you know, that it's just really not cool, you know. Like you stay faithful, and if you don't stay faithful, you're a traitor, you know. That I'm talking about, like, that's the way I was thinking about it for myself, you know. I don't go around calling people traitors and stuff like that, but there is that element in there, you know. And that's really what the writer of Hebrews has been kind of saying, you know, like, you don't shrink back. We're not the kind of people who shrink back. And they were having a lot harder time than I've ever had.
Yeah.
And in terms of, you know, having their goods plundered, and you know, at the end of this, he's going to warn them, you know, you haven't yet resisted to the point of blood, but the where he's going with it is that, like, but you will. So the context that we're finding from Hebrews is that it's around the time, either right before or right after the fall of Jerusalem. So you know, people were going to get killed, and we know from the Roman era that Christianity after that point was no joke. You know, like, you risk your life, and a lot of these guys were being fed to the lions and hung upside down on a cross or whatever else. You know, being burned.
The fall of Jerusalem, I mean, wasn't Rome already in charge of Jerusalem?
Rome was already in charge of Jerusalem. What happened was that there was a lot of you know, what was happening was that there was a rebellion in Jerusalem against Rome.
Mm.
And then Rome, you know, got mad and was like, we'll show you. And they destroyed the temple. They ransacked the city.
We gave you an inch, you want to take a mile. So
Yeah. And so the Christians weren't really involved in all of that. In fact, they, because of some prophecies and because of something that they were reading in Luke, when they saw that the armies were surrounding, they saw, like, when you see Jesus says in Luke 11, when you see the armies surrounding the city or whatever, get out of there, run, right? And they took that as prophetic. So when they saw that, they weren't like, oh, we're going to fight them. Like, a lot of Jews were like, we're just going to fight them because God's on our side. We're going to defeat the Romans. We were like, no, we're going to run. So they got out of there. And so the Jews in Jerusalem were saved, you know, but the political environment intensified against the Christians by the Romans from, you know, like, going from that point forward, and they were not treated well. So my righteous one will live by faith, and my soul takes no pleasure in anyone who shrinks back. So the life of faith requires belief, of course, but it also requires endurance, holding fast, faithfulness, loyalty, those sorts of things. In fact, in the Old Testament, when you see faith and what faith is, there's an idea attached to it that it's a believing loyalty. You believe in all these gods, but you're loyal to this one, and that's the starting point for a lot of people. In fact, even Rahab the harlot, she had her gods and everything, and Abraham had his gods and everything. But Yahweh's like, dump them, get away from that area, come follow me. And their loyalty shifted to Yahweh.
It makes me think of when the servants, sometimes they were slaves, and when their term was up, they could leave the master, but sometimes they would choose to stay with the master.
Right.
And that took a lot of faith that they were trusting which direction the master was going,
Yeah. They tied themselves to Yahweh, and that's what faith encompassed, was like a believing loyalty. I will be their people, and they will, I will be their God, and they will be my people. And we're going to enter a covenant with each other. So Hebrews, it also involves moving forward, not just enduring and holding fast and keeping, but it's also moving forward, which is a harder thing for some of us, including myself. And that's like the act of obedience, and that's the perseverance in the sense that you're going after something and you keep on going. Some would call it perseverating, but it's but you're just you believe in something and you're going to go after it. So what Hebrews 11 is not primarily about is a description of what people have in their head. It's not like here's all these people and this is what they believed in their head, or this is what they had. This is the hall of faith is full of things that people did in response to the faith that they had. There was always an action involved, and it changed things. And so their belief was a starting point for something much, much, much more. So it's also not a description of people following their dreams or believing in themselves. And I'm being snarky here, but I have to bring it up because that kind of that's our culture. Believe in yourself. Yeah, follow your dreams. And then and a lot of people kind of come to Christ thinking, when they hear about believing and everything, they conflate it with all of that kind of stuff, and and it's like it's like Jesus is there to help you make all your dreams come true. And we have some teaching that is a little bit what do you call it, name it and claim it, and
it's like a millennial message, like
yeah,
you can do anything you want to do.
You can do anything you want to do if you just believe. Yeah, you see that in Disney movies. It's like that's the thing that's pumped into our culture so heavily that the church sounds like that, And sometimes I think what we need is missionaries from places where, it's hard being a Christian.
Someone to come over from North Korea and tell us what's
Yeah, someone from North Korea and say, hey, I don't really relate to any of this. For me, let me tell you what faith looks like to me, and I think we could learn from that. So it's also not about naming and claiming, and it's not especially like material goods, right? We'll see. I'm not like I'm not talking against believing for your healing and those sorts of things. And even like this house, was something that there was a faith, that there was something that like told us like now's the right time. But the thing is that like we had to be patient for like a long time before it was the right time. And when it was, God was giving us confirmation, okay, move now because I want to bless you, right? And it was a sort of, in fact, Rachel wakes up one morning and sees a guy in her mind, and it's like, yeah, he can help. He sees that guy at church that night, says, hey, oh, how you guys doing? Like, oh, we're looking for a home and thing. And he goes, yeah, I can help. It's just like little things like that. And turns out he bought this in auction, and so that is like 9 months later. But there was like a lot of things there where God gives you something like a starting point, you know, not just something that you kind of come up with yourself. Gee, I really want a Cadillac, or like um, and people get like, uh, like even in our culture, it's sort of like, yeah, I went to, I'm just gonna go to the mall. I'm gonna pray for a good parking spot, and God will do those little things, and He'll blow you kisses all day long, but it's not like a thing that you, it's not a thing that you live for. And so what you're going to see like a progression in these people's lives where they start with this nugget of faith, and God does bless them, does do things, but ultimately it's not about anything in this life anyway. It's like we all have to come to this point where we die and we have to trust God for the next life, for the new Jerusalem, and for the promises that we're not going to see in this life, and that it's all about that over there, and not really, and you're going to see like in this chapter that all of these died without having received the promise. They received a lot of things that they did see, and God did guide them, but they all died without the promise. And so will we. And that's so we have this starting point, and God does breathe into our lives, but it becomes a thing that like if He did that, and yeah, I know that was God, I can believe Him for the next thing. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I can keep on believing, and it's a thing that can build. But it's not about like achieving that and getting that bomb job, or whatever else. It's about it's about something much, much bigger. So and then here they're being plundered by their goods, like that. It's not about the material goods, because a bunch of them got nothing now because their goods have been plundered, and and because of their faith. It's because of their faith that they were poor. It's like they held on in the face of adversity. So they're undergoing persecution. Some of them would soon face death for their faith. So this is all a description of how they lived by faith. And that's it's not about having faith, it's about living by faith. It's about having faith, but it's more about living by faith. So the exhortation to the Hebrews is primarily stay faithful no matter what. So here's the progression of faith that I was just talking about. You often see this progression of faith in many of these stories. First, there's a basis on which somebody believes. Then there are events that reinforce that, signs. Gideon's like, show me, can you make this fleece wet, even though it's dry? And he asks for a second sign, and God gives it to him, right? And then now he's got faith to step out and do the next thing, but and blessings are given, miracles happen, etc. But ultimately it's about an inheritance that none of us have in full yet. And the believer is willing to die in faith and trusting that God has a promise and a reward on the other side of the resurrection. Ultimately, it's about the new Jerusalem.
Would you sum that up? There's a basis of faith and there's signs.
Yeah, there's signs. There are events that reinforce that belief. Typically, what happens is God will just speaks to somebody's heart. I'm real, or you're sitting there by yourself and you go, how did this universe get here? And it's I'm either like faced with I'm just an accident. All of this happened by accident, but I don't think that's right. I think there's something else, and it could be just something, that little seed that starts to grow and go, wait a minute, I actually am starting to believe in God, or it just hits you out once. Everybody's story is a little bit different, but it starts with something, and then God confirms things, and then you start praying and you start trying to get closer to God, and then it's like things pop up in your life. This happened to like everybody. There's little things, like little things that that are true, or it could be a blatant miracle. Maybe cancer suddenly disappeared from somebody or you in your family, like nothing but a miracle could explain it. And those things where even when things don't happen, miracles don't happen or don't seem to be happening or whatever, you'll believe through all of that, because ultimately you've gotten to a point where you're going to trust God with your life, even if it means the end of it.
It reminds me of what you were saying about being in a covenant. Like the covenant's like a will; it's not fulfilled unless you die. Like
Right.
They all died in their faith.
They all
It's
died.
almost like
That's a great point.
that's like the fulfillment of it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you carry it through till the end,
Right. Yeah. I put all the focus on the one making the covenant has to die, which was God himself. And the person of Jesus had to die. No, but that's I think
give our life to Christ, we kind of make a covenant to him.
we make a covenant to him, and there's that recognition that, like, in order to come back into Eden,
you have to die.
you have to die. There was always that representative of the. Yeah, we're gonna get into that a little bit today. Hypostasis. So hypostasis, faith is the hypostasis of things hoped for. We'll talk about this word because it's appeared already in it appears in Hebrews in a couple different places. But hypostasis, if you took apart the word in Greek, it means to stand under or standing under. Okay. And you're like, well, how does that make sense? Well, it's because it's a foundation, it's a basis. Okay. So hypostasis. The other places that we've already seen it was once that in chapter 1, he is the radiance and the glory of God and the exact imprint of his hypostasis. So it's the nature or the substance, like Christ is the exact imprint of the substance of God, what he really is at the bottom of it. It's like the thing that holds it up. So, and another place there you see this word is in 3:14. It says, "For we have become partners of Christ if only we hold our first hypostasis." That means the first confidence that we have in him, the basis that we have to believe.
It's like a position, kind of like being under that confidence.
Yeah, it's kind of like so I think that so in some translations you're going to see faith is the substance of things hoped for, but it's also you also see that it's the confidence of things hoped for. And there's some other words that are used depending on like what translation you have. They're all kind of like uses, and they're all like English words that we've used kind of like to describe what hypostasis is. It's one of those words that there's not like an English equivalent for it. But there's something, like it's the being of something, or it's the nature of something, the substance of something. So because of that, you can have an assurance about it. So here's something that Amy Peeler wrote. She said, if she writes it as hypostasis, I use the one from the Greek thing online, the blue letter, whatever, hypostasis. But if hypostasis is something basic, right, something solid, something firm, then it provides a place to stand from which we can hope.
So it's like a foundation.
It's a foundation, yeah. Foundation. It's like you could say it's the foundation for things hoped for. And like I said, it's not like we're not talking about like some blind faith here that like you have faith just because. There's always like that. It begins with something.
Like they knew Christ resurrected or something.
Yeah, it's either they saw Christ was resurrected, or for like a lot of it, for me, it was kind of like, do I believe that the universe came here by itself and that everything's accidental, or is there a design behind it? And it's kind of like that's for me, it's kind of like that became like the basis on which you build.
Or like it's like a covering of, like, you believe that the universe had to be built, so that's almost your hypostasis of some faith in God.
Right. But, or like why do you believe, like, there's been a lot of times where I've run out of the home like in just shorts and without a jacket on while it's like cold, because I have this basis of believing that it's going to be quite a bit warmer later.
Oh, like June, well, like,
You know, like,
kind of know.
yeah, you already know, you've been there before. There's something already that you already know to trust, you know. So it's kind of like there's you know, faith is that basis, but that basis is usually for some for each one of us is probably like a little bit different. Like, why do you believe in the first place? But based on that, it becomes the basis for all of the other faith that happens in your life, you know. So enkelos, it's the enkelos of things not seen. This is an even harder word because it only appears here in the New Testament. It doesn't appear anywhere else in the New Testament. And but it's used in the Septuagint, you know, like the Greek translation of the Old Testament, and of some other books or whatever, like 30 some times, right? But here's what's weird about it is that it's usually in a negative sense. So it's usually translated as reproof or rebuke or like conviction, as in like this person was convicted based on this evidence. Job uses it like in a more positive sense a couple times, but even there he's like, if I could bring my proof to God, you know, it's kind of like his rebuttal, right? So yeah, so it's a weird thing. Why is this writer using like this negative kind of word like a rebuttal, right? So it's the truth somebody doesn't want to hear this, okay? And it begin with no, like that you said something, but no. It's like, no, I'm countering this, okay? Um, so I'll bring up something, you know, there was a question, can this be connected to the loving correction of God in the next chapter? And I think that we'll get there eventually to see maybe that's a case for it. But here's more like a little bit more like what it is. You have a basis for like in hypostasis to go after the things that you hope. But between that and you doing it, there's a lot of pushback. It's a lot of people telling you, a lot of circumstances telling you it can't happen. It doesn't make sense. You don't see it. You're fighting not just against what you don't see. A lot of times you're fighting against what you do see.
Like a real life thing is you wanted to get this house, buy a house, but
yeah, there's going to be like obstacles in the way. So like a part of what's given, you know, your faith is also has that fight back against thing. It's not just going after the things that are hoped for. It's also fighting back against the things that are not seen. It's like, despite the circumstances, no, I will walk through the fire because I'm not going to bow down to this idol. You know, I will walk through the Red Sea, even though this water looks like it could collapse on me any second now. Still, I'm going to do it. You know, it's that constant, it's that battle language, you know,
like vain imaginations.
Yeah, it's fighting back kind of thing. Yeah, it's a battle for your mind. The whole thing is about, there's a battle for your mind the entire time. And so like that's why I think that like this writer is using this word enkelos. It's a reproof, it's a rebuke. It's like, no, I'm coming against this. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So it's like Moses, we see in verse 7, it's like it's Noah. By his faith he condemned the world, right? Because he was going against the grain of the world. It's the rebuttal to the things not seen and the reproof against the way things appear. So, you know, something like that. So verses 2 and 3, for by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith, we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen is not made out of the things that are visible. So this is foundational. So he's starting with the very basic thing. Why do you believe in God? You know, and for me, I understand this verse is like, by faith, I understand the universe had to be created by something other than the universe. It didn't just appear here. You know, whether you buy into the Big Bang Theory or whatever other theory, you always have to go back to the uncaused cause. Well, what caused the Big Bang? Well, what caused these? You know, like it's just pushes the question further and further back, and you're left with either an accident, and I'm here by freak chance, or there's something else going on. And if there's something else going on, then somebody did this. This is like somebody's design, and that is like the nugget that you can build on. So it's so he starts off with something very foundational, and it's also really simple. This is before any of the mention of like the great things that are done by faith. He just starts with like what we all believe, right? It's like yeah, it's like we understand already, yeah, that like um God made the universe.
Like almost like the thing of the stars and the trees and all that is kind of evidence there has to be a God already.
Right. Yeah. It's just that the basic understanding. There's got to be a God somewhere, right? Or and that he created it by his word, you know, and so that the things that I do see had to be been made out of some made by something that I can't see. Even if you're talking about that scientific, something that I can measure, all the things that I can measure and test and write about and do equations about had to come from somewhere that I can't do measurements and equations and tests about. You know, it's got to come from outside of that somewhere. You know, so as the Word of God, now think of this, okay? So as the Word of God created the universe, the Word of God created the universe, it also creates and mediates your faith. So you remember the verse, faith comes by hearing, but hearing by the Word of God, right? There is faith that's actually created in you. In fact, I forget where it is. It's you know, nobody comes to Christ unless the Holy Spirit draws him. There's something that like that God does through his word that draws you into faith to begin with. You know, there is an action by God that actually enables you to start seeing things in the first place. God breathed a gift of faith into every believer, because faith comes by hearing. Remember last week we were talking about the ear dug out
Oh yeah, that example.
yeah, that ear dug out. I'm not going to go, you know, into it, but it's like that ear is like that thing where like you know, in the last chapters, like Psalm 40, it says something, an ear you have dug out for me so that I can, and so here I am to obey you. It's like you gave me an ear to obey what you've done.
Yeah,
To
John's like in
obey.
the beginning was the word, and God is the word. Like the word isn't usually seen; it's heard. So
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like that. The faith comes by that hearing, by the, you know, like the ear that God dug out for you, and that hearing, your ability to even obey Him in the first place is comes by the creative power of God, which is His Word. Kind of a complex idea, but something to think about. In turn, okay, on the other side of this, the faithfulness or the faith of the believer brings the invisible into the visible realm. All of these stories that you're going to see is somebody bringing God's word to action in the world in a way that you can see. So that they're obeying God, or their faith is doing something, and because of what they did, you see God move. God's not going to, it got, you know, like you have to get to the water before it parts. It's like the Abraham moves to that place, and he there's actions they actually do that bring the invisible into the visible. So it's like by faith on one hand, it's like we understand that God made the things that are visible out of the invisible. But on the other side of that, the believer's faith also brings the invisible into the visible. It's like it's our part of bringing God's reality and to be fleshed out in the world. It's a difficult thing to articulate. And
It's like, was that ram stuck in the bushes? Or if Abraham didn't go up there with Isaac, maybe that ram wasn't stuck in the bushes.
yeah, it's like when you see these believers act and do things, then you see the miracles and the things that God does go hand in hand with their obedience, and it brings
Like
it.
he's asking for something of us too, kind of like.
Yeah, our we have a part in bringing God's realities into the world. Even if you're just praying for somebody's healing, right? Like you're part of that, and then they get healed, but other people can witness that, and like the doctors or whoever knows those people, and it's like the community of faith has brought something into reality, or at least they've done their part. Yeah, it's God, but God wants you to participate in it because he wants to show himself strong through his people.
It's like how he let Adam name the animals. Like he let us be like caretakers of the earth with him. Like,
exactly.
That's kind of with faith. Like he wants us to be part of it with him.
Yeah, we have that part. So you could say that mustard seed of faith that you have of just believing there's got to be a God somewhere, recognizing that there has to be a creator, can grow into a faith which mountains are moved. You have the seed of faith of a mustard seed, you can tell this mountain to move. And I think that this is kind of like, there's a process in between that. But it seems to be a little bit of like what I think it's what Jesus is talking about. I'm taking a little bit of license there. Eric Heen has had this paragraph. It says, faith, rather than being something ultimately dependent on us, comes to us at God's own initiative, which being mediated by God's word engenders a hope-filled response to the promises of God. So, but that's a mouthful. He's a difficult writer. Okay, so he's saying that, like what I've said, that like it's not just up to us that we had faith, but God actually produced faith into it by his word, and his word produced that faith in us, and it also mediates it, and it causes this hope-filled response within us to the promises of God. So this response that like we're going to go after this hope that's been set in front of us, and God makes visible through the lives the assemblies of believers. So it's like we are going after this hope, this thing that's been put in us to hope after this and go after it. It's the thing that brings these things, make it visible to the rest of the world. What otherwise would remain invisible. They would have been invisible to anybody else and to the world unless they can see that hope in us and us going after it. Okay. In other words, one who trusts God's promises is God's own witness to the creation. You trust God, it's like there's something in you that makes you a witness to his creation. It's incredible that like we call ourselves like witnesses of Christ or whatever, a lot of times we think, well, that's our testimony. This is what he's done in my life. That's a big part of it. There's also just the things that we can't put into words. It's a hope that we have, like we are a witness to him being King of Kings. We're a witness of him being the lamb slain from the foundation of the earth. He's all these things. We have these stories and we can say, yeah, God's answered prayers and everything, but like it's those things that like our belief in him being all these things that you can't see right now, we become the witness to those things because of this hope and the faith that we have in Christ. This is a hard thing to get here. I know. I'll just read the rest of this. In other words, one who trusts God's promises is God's own witness to the new creation and is that is breaking out in our everyday visible world through the gospel of Jesus Christ. We are experiencing new creation. And here, resurrection, a sub-theme in this section, is not only a source of such faith, but provides its patterning. In faith, as in resurrection, God calls to new life out of that which is as good as dead. He's resurrecting and making new life out of, and this is like in people's testimonies all the time, the thing that was dead in you, and you come to your end or whatever, that God breathes new life into it. And he resurrects in parts. But we know that ultimately, because he's resurrected this part of my life and resurrected, that God, we can trust him to resurrect us from the dead, period. Well, anyway, okay,
That's like some deep stuff. Man.
It is, yeah,
Your brain starts getting wrapped around it, and then all of a sudden you're coming around the other side.
Yeah, wait a minute. Okay, yeah, I'm going to move on. So,
I don't know if we'll ever get it all. Though,
yeah, Eric Keene, maybe if I,
on YouTube.
By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, though through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts. And through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. In other words, so we know the story of Cain and Abel, and that God accepted his sacrifice, but not the story of Abel. Abel, gives a sacrifice, and he doesn't accept Cain's sacrifice, but he accepts Abel's. And then, of course, he gets killed by his brother. But here it says, and through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. Okay, so he's saying that, like, in a way, he's still living in the sense that, like, that his testimony of who God is and something that he did is a witness to God. I'm going to get into this a little bit more, but he's going to compare this to Enoch, who does not die. So he's got somebody who dies, and he's got somebody who did not die, right? By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death. So he's saying, whether you die or whether you live, and you're, and don't, and we know there's going to be people that are there till the end. And, Paul showed us this mystery that we will not all die, but those who will remain till the end, we're going to be transformed, on the spot. But either way, there's still like something that they're bringing into the world. And he was not found because God had taken him. Now, before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. Here's something that a couple of weeks ago we were talking about, the atonement. Mm-hmm. Remember? And like you and I were listening to that Bible Project podcast about the atonement. Once, and you got to listen to it. Okay. Once I understood, no, atonement can happen whenever you have that substitutionary life, right? Of the innocent has to die, but then the life of that tamim, the innocent, right, is brought into Eden. Okay.
Like the innocent goat was brought into the.
Well, it's the blood of the innocent lamb, right?
The blood of Christ. Yes.
Yeah, it's a foretaste, really, or it's a foreshadowing of what Christ would do. He would die outside of the tabernacle, but he would present his blood in the Holy of Holies, which is like Eden. It's like the presence of God being with man. It is actually Eden in a way. But so the story of the Bible, of course, like, how do we get back to Eden? Into the presence of God and ruling.
Hold on a sec. Mark, I'm sorry. Excuse me, Mark. I have to go. Okay, I will talk to you later. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye,
I'll see you. I'll actually see you Friday.
Okay. Have a blessed week.
All
Bye.
right. Bye. Okay. So if you're talking about like the atonement, what kind of a sense does it make for Cain to bring a grain offering or a plant offering? Because I used to think that it was a little bit arbitrary, it's like, well, like we don't really know. But now I'm starting to wonder if it was because Abel saw that there had to be a substitutionary atonement.
Because it doesn't really tell us in Genesis exactly how they were supposed to know.
No, but you're supposed to think about it, and the picture that you get is that, you've got like, you're outside of Eden, but nobody's traveled away from Eden. All we know is like the cherubim saying, no, you can't go back to the tree of life. Doesn't say anything about like, and they went really far, far away. They're exiled outside of the Garden of Eden. They're still in the region of Eden though, because the Garden of Eden was just in one place in Eden, and so there is this picture of them doing the sacrifices because the question is like, how can we come back into God's presence and eat? It's like, and you have the picture of Cain and Abel bringing their sacrifices before God at the gates almost of Eden. It's sort of like an implied thing.
At the temple almost.
Yeah, you're bringing it there, right? You're bringing it there, but you can't have like this fellowship offering without the atonement first. There's something that Cain and that Abel seems to understand, that somebody has to die in my place. You know what I mean? There seems to be like
it's literally about the blood or the aspect of life.
Yeah, it's that, because what he does is you're like, how does Abel know about this?
Kind of
like yeah.
Like, is it unfair that like, well, Cain was just a farmer and Abel was a shepherd dude, so it's like,
I don't know. Yeah, shepherd dude, and it's like and he's like a like field guy,
but somehow
because
there's an understanding of the death and life actually.
Yeah, it looks like, because you're going, well, what Abel did was actually a substitutionary atonement. This is something that you would do outside of the temple, and then you would present it in the temple, or it would be presented through a priest in the temple. But and Hebrews has been talking about this chapter after chapter, and now is bringing up Abel. But you got to think like, is he seeing something that like Abel has this faith to do that, saying, like a substitutionary atonement is going to be presented before God, and I'm going to return back into God's presence, because this is because he draws near to God. And we actually see that in like the next several verses, right? Before we go there, it says Enoch walked with God. He walked by faith and pleased God. So, he was considered Tamim, and for some mysterious reason, he is allowed into God's presence. God just takes him into his presence. It's like remarkable, right? And he entered God's presence without having died. Actually, Moses goes into God's presence for a short while. And then there's that question, well, is Moses now not going to die? He does die, but it says when he did die, it was as if he was like, he hadn't aged at all. So like there's kind of like wow, what's going on there? So it's
like maybe when you went up to the mountain in the presence of God, maybe you almost stopped aging at that point.
Or I don't know. It's a weird kind of factoid put at the end of Deuteronomy, right? It's like he dies and he's like, but he lost none of his vitality. He was like, it's like in that 40 years, like as if nothing had happened. It's like, now it's time for you to die and come here. But other than that, like you're still ticking like you were 40 years ago when you were only 80 years old. But
Does it say that though, or does it just say that, or is it just letting us know that he wasn't like old and decrepit, like not doing well, like ailing and then dying?
I don't know. You can see it. It said that like he'd lost none of his vitality and that sort of thing. But like so I don't know.
Yeah, what that entails.
It's like, why is that there though? You know?
If the
And there-
Bible, if they put it there, there must have been like some, like the writer chose to put that in there, there must have been some.
Yeah, there's some reason that the writer's putting it in there, you know. He's telling you something, and he's telling you something about, you know, like him going up there and then coming down with the glory of God all over him, where the people didn't even want to look at him, and he's got a veil, like there was a veil on the whole, you know, like on the holy place. It's like something, you know, there was like something about the being in the presence of God, and just having seen the trail of God's presence, you know, that made it so that, you know, there had to be a veil between him and the people for a while. You know, like there was a veil between the people and the Holy of Holies. So without faith, it is impossible to please him, for whatever it would draw near. He's talking about like the Enoch and Abel drawing near to God. Like Abel and like Enoch, they must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. By faith, Noah, having been warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world. So there's that kind of like the Enkelos idea, you know, like where,
Like he was fighting the vain
yeah,
imaginations.
yeah, exactly. So he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. That's an interesting thing, because when you talk about like heir of the righteousness that come by faith, who do you think of?
Yes.
Well, no, what, like from what point on? Like when we're talking about like becoming an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith, when you read Paul and you usually you're talking about Abraham, right? You know, like he's like the father of the kind of like the father of the faith, and from him, you know, it's like you become an heir of the things that were promised to him and his children, right? Noah comes before Abraham, so he's already telling you that like Noah becomes an heir before Abraham of the things that were promised to Abraham. You know, so and then speaking of Abraham, he goes right into Abraham and Abraham, you know. So it's kind of like he's you know, where it's easy to see after Abraham that, you know, like who the heirs of this promise are, but he's already placing Noah there. In other words, they're looking for the same thing. He's already putting them in the category that Abraham and Noah were looking for a promised land. They were looking for something, and that's kind of like where chapter 11. They're looking for the New Jerusalem ultimately. This is something that like you know, like Hebrews 11 is kind of going to build up to, you know, because they didn't receive things promised, but they're believing along with us for the inheritance that is to come. So that, you know, like we're heirs and we're co-heirs with Christ.
Like Abraham died before his offspring were like the sands of the sea and all that.
Yeah.
Like,
But Noah's way before that.
yeah.
And so Noah's already looking for something. He's seeing the same thing. So by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. So here he's talking about that inheritance already, right? So God tells Abraham, go to this place and I'm going to show you your inheritance. But the writer of Hebrews is already saying that like Noah became an inheritor of that as well, even though Noah lived long before. It's
like the word inheritance, like for to inherit something that comes, it's not about you, but it's about like your status, like you're a son of the. So is it
yeah,
like
it's
Abraham, like he chose to put himself under God, like so he got an inheritance.
Man's commission has always been to rule the earth on God's behalf, to be the ruling king and priest of God's creation, right? We lost that, or we forfeited it, in a sense, and now we have the ruler of the powers of the air, Satan and his minions or whatever. You know, they're ruling a bunch of stuff. We still kind of hold on to that, but what happens in Revelation, you know, remember the scroll that nobody could look at? It's the kind of thing that like in the Roman days would be kind of like what you're talking about, like I'm handing this kingdom to you now, right? But in the Old Testament, when you look at a sealed scroll, there's been a couple times where it was mentioned as a land deed, so title deed. So you got both ideas there. So like, it's almost as if Christ took the title deed of the earth. He's like, man was always supposed to rule the earth on God's behalf. I am that new Adam that's going to do this. And the reason that John is convulsingly crying in Revelation is because he doesn't see anybody who's worthy, not under the earth, not on the earth. You know, it's like, we screwed this up. This has all gone bad, except Christ has now taken that scroll, and he's the one who's worthy to reign on the earth. And those who believe in him, those who follow him, they'll be co-inheritors of that earth. We're going to rule the earth with Christ. Yeah. So Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out into a place and he was to receive it as an inheritance. He went out not knowing where he's going. By faith, he went on to live in the land of promise as if in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise, just like Noah, you know. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations. There you get that foundations theme again, like faith, like hypostasis, you know, whose designer and builder is God, Jesus, the author, you know, and perfecter of our faith. I'm not going to get too into this idea, make everybody's head hurt. But this city is the place of rest that we're talking about in chapter 4. You know, remember in chapter 4, it's talking like if Joshua had brought them rest. In other words, if Joshua had Joshua conquered the land. You know, you don't get Abraham misses out on seeing his offspring there. This doesn't happen until Moses has led everybody there. Moses dies, but then Joshua goes into the land. They conquer the land under Joshua, right? Mm-hmm. So that's when Israel takes over that land. Now they're in that promised land, right? And so like this whole time, you know, like God said, you know, because of these unbelief, these guys are not going to enter my rest. You're thinking that land, that inheritance, that promise, right? So the unbelieving generation dies off. The rest of them, they go in under Joshua. They inherit that. And you think, well, now they've got rest, right? They've got that rest. But David, much later after Joshua, says, he's the one who writes that psalm, you know, like today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts as they did, because God said they will never enter my rest. So David's talking about a rest that still has to happen and an inheritance that still has to happen. It's like,
I think he got it was a spiritual one. And then
well, see, David is like, I am king over Israel. This is the golden age of Israel, right? Like as far as politics goes. And he's like, but he's like saying, no, this is already, but not yet. Yeah, we're here, but this isn't rest. This isn't what God has promised. It's like he's promised this, but there's something much bigger than this. So he's like saying, this is almost an example of what we're looking for. So even David is seeing that like this. It can't be about a piece of real estate in the Middle East. That's not what this is about. This is about something, the new Jerusalem, the new Israel, something much bigger than, you know, like so many square miles, like over here, like, you know, like by Jordan and Syria and and the Sinai Peninsula. You know, it's like it's like. That is just a shadow of what God wants
for us. Because David didn't have the Bible to read either.
No, so right, yeah.
He had to have this like revelation in his head.
But he had Abraham. He had enough to understand that this is not what we're talking about, and we're gonna go. actually, with this, we'll get there in a second, okay? By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive even when she was past the age. She considered him faithful, and I put this in bold because it's related to the same word as faith, okay? And I've gone through that already. Who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, that's Abraham. He's as good as dead
He's
because,
always as good as dead.
yeah, right. Were born descendants, as many as the stars of heaven, as many as an innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. Okay, so here, and this is going to be the last passage that we cover, okay? I'll just read it first, okay? It says, these all died in faith. What David is seeing, David dies, but he knows, like, it's not about this Jerusalem, which I've kind of like conquered and, like that Joshua conquered. This isn't the rest that we're talking about, because he's writing poetry about like the rest that God still has for his people, right? And that the rest in Hebrew is talking like, yeah, you're going to have rest in your land, but this is not the land what we're talking about, right? These all died in faith. All of them, they died in faith, not having received the things promised. But having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. Okay, they're like, even though we conquered this land, even though this has happened or whatever, we're still exiles. We're still strangers here. This is not our home, guys. Okay. For people who speak thus, make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have the opportunity to go back, But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. City is a New
Dude, I've
Jerusalem.
never like caught that part before somehow.
Yeah, it's okay. So there's Fernweh. Fernweh is this German word, and there's not really a direct English translation, but what it is a sense of homesickness.
Oh, there's a Japanese word like that too.
But for a place you haven't gone yet. Have you ever had this experience that you have a homesickness? You've been homesick, right? Have you been homesick? Like you. But have you ever had that same sort of feeling, but for a place you've never even been to? Some people think it's kind of
like that about heaven and stuff. I think.
Yeah. There's a certain thing. Sometimes people will look at a picture of a place they've never been, and all of a sudden they get like a homesick. It's kind of like when you have deja vu. It's like you've either experienced or you haven't. It's like it's like one of those things. But the Germans have this word for it, like this feeling that some people have gotten when they think of a place that they've never even been to. They feel homesick all of a sudden, like as if they belong there.
And it's not even a thing about there's somewhere else that you necessarily know, but you just don't feel totally comfortable where you are. Like there has to be more than like a hotel like has almost everything, but it still doesn't feel like home in a way.
Right.
It's like Earth is not my home.
Yeah.
This is like this.
Right. Exactly. It's this sort of, and it's the sort of thing that like not only do you really want to be there at that place you've never been, it's kind of like this, it's almost nostalgic, right? Kind of like you used to be there or something.
Like
a weird memory of like when you get homesick, you belong there, but you have like this nostalgic feeling of like back then. But the thing is, you've never even been there before, right? Okay. That's like a Fahrenway's like this idea. And what happened when the Israelites were like, they'd gone through their whole phase where they had a country, and then it got split up, and then a bunch of them were taken out into exile up in Assyria, and then a bunch of them went into exile in Babylon, right? All this stuff happened in Babylon. Babylon gets, they're there for like 70 some years. And then there's a new kingdom that comes, and it's the Persian Empire. And through the Persian Empire, there's a guy named Cyrus who comes along and goes, why don't you guys go back and rebuild Jerusalem? So they're going, we're going back home, guys. We've been out here as slaves, you know, like now Cyrus has defeated the Babylonians and we're going to go back home. And we're going to be, and so they go back home and a lot of struggle and they rebuild the temple. And they get all that done. And the people who were old enough to remember the old temple, they're like crying. They're like, this isn't like the old days at all. This doesn't have the glory. And where's the glory? Where's the presence of God in it? You know, it's like, this isn't it, guys. And they go through the, you know, you get to the end of the Old Testament, and it's like you have this sense that, you know, guys, we came back from exile. We're in our own homeland, but we're still in exile. This isn't home.
Longing for something else.
This is that longing for something else, even though we're in the same place. It's just not the same. And even if you would go back to David's day, he was saying, guys, this isn't it. And they come to realize that humanity is in exile. Ever since Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden, none of us have been home.
Funny how this goes with that Revelation class. So much kind of.
Yeah. And it's that sense in humanity. A lot of people like can describe it like that there's a God-shaped hole in everybody, right? And yeah, you can go to that God-shaped hole and you can get saved. And you know, it's great when you get saved. You do realize that there's something that's been satisfied in you, but you're still in exile. Okay. But now you've got an understanding about it because you're not looking for this life to satisfy it. You know, you got to come to the place where you're letting go of the world and you're saying, this world can't satisfy it. And the peace that the believer has isn't that things got all settled now that you became a Christian, because that's not true in anybody's life. In the Christian's life, it's just not true. Some things got settled, but you know you're still in exile, but now you've got a reason to understand. Now you've got an understanding what it is, because you're going, you know what? This world isn't right. And I'm going to go to my grave in the belief that God is going to make it right. And we're going to be home someday, you know? So here in verse 13, it says, having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the world. You know, they acknowledged it. They're going, you know what? We're strangers and exiles here. We get this. Yeah. And you know what? You can't embrace this world. In fact, you embrace the cross. You embrace, you know, you pick up your cross and follow Jesus, and you you try to save your life, you're going to lose it. But if you lose your life for his sake, you're going to keep it, because your eyes are not focused on this world anymore. It's not about this world. It's about something beyond here, you know? And so that's what, you know, like what it gives an explanation to like why humanity feels this sense of exile and feels this sense of Fahrenway, you know? It's not, yeah, this isn't how God made it to be. And we got to get back to Eden. That's got to happen somewhere. And now we have a hope, because Christ by his own blood has come into that space on our behalf. And because of that, we're going to be there someday. All right. So, and of course, Lewis has always got like some fantastic thing to say about it, right? So he says, the Christian says, this is from Mere Christianity, creatures were born with desires. Creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there is such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there is such a thing as sex. But if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. There's something that like in each of us that like this world cannot fill. It doesn't exist in this world, but we have a hunger for it.
What a brave assertion on his part, like.
Yeah,
Like he was so confident in knowing he didn't feel at home here, like that he's went all the way to the asteroid level, like, dang, there must be a whole other world.
there's got to be. I'm made for some other world. And this is something, Chris, you were just saying that you can relate to, right? You know, if none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. So now he's bringing this like, yeah, you know that for hunger there's food, you know that for like for those who want to swim there is water and stuff like that. But all this has like its limits, and it never really satisfies. It only suggests something much bigger. It's like and more real, exactly. If that is so, I must take care on one hand, never to despise or be unthankful for these earthly blessings. It's not like you're going to like, oh, this earth sucks, forget it. No, you know, let's trash it, you know, or anything like that, and just be unthankful. You got to be thankful, you know, there's still a lot to be thankful for. But on the other hand, never mistake them for something else of which they are only a kind of copy or echo or mirage. Don't mistake your desire for these things and those things as being the real thing, because you know that they don't satisfy. They're a mirage of something that's much bigger, right? I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country. Here is using the same language, right? My true country, which I shall not find until after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of this life to press on to that country and to help others to do the same.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I just watched that movie about him too, The Most Reluctant Convert,
Yeah.
and so it's cool to think about him saying that.
You know, it's like I love that idea of this, you know, like when you read that passage in Krista, I see you smiling big there, you know. But when, you know, because you went through the Exile series with us here last year.
Oh, that's one of the
Yeah.
studies, all the different times in the Bible talk about being exiled.
Yeah, there's this whole theme of exile in the Bible. It's from the first couple of pages all the way through. There's this theme of exile, you know.
I feel like ashamed, almost embarrassed of, I think how I used to read the Bible more because I'm supposed to. I got to get like 2 chapters in a day. So I just read right over stuff sometimes. Like,
I don't get anywhere near 2 chapters a day.
well, yeah, like the thing is, it's like when I'm seeing all these things that are tied together,
Yeah.
or like, oh, I read that he said like exiles, but I didn't really think, well, they were exiled from the garden.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I feel like, hey man, I'm an idiot. Like, how much time did I waste?
No.
Connecting?
Yeah, no, it's but still there's enough there that like once you do, you have the pieces to connect.
Yeah.
And then like now you're like some of the pieces are connecting, but those had to be there already, you know.
Well,
But
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say though, I mean, don't feel like an idiot. I found that I think that's what's so great about the Bible, because you can read it. Have you guys ever read, like, we'll go and we'll listen to a message and they'll be reading the thing. And it's like you've read that passage for forever, you know, and all of a sudden there's a certain verse that will pop out and it's like, I've never seen that verse before or in that way, you know. It's just, that's what's great about the Bible.
And it changed.
It's not, it's not a book that you just read from beginning to end and then you're done. You know, it's always something fresh, and yeah.
A lot of meditation went into writing it.
Mm-hmm.
Very heavily crafted
Yeah.
words, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Even look at like the way like the books are constructed, you know, like where they're parallels and everything, and the repetition of words and the careful.
Yeah.
And you're like, and it's meant to be chewed on, mulled over, and then you notice a little thing and it changes the whole flavor of that entire passage or something.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And we were talking about death and exile, that like exile is a type of death, and then that death is the ultimate exile.
Mm.
And because even from the beginning, God says, you know, the day that you eat of that fruit, you will die.
Mhm.
And you're,
Die.
well,
Exile.
yeah, they were exiled.
Exile. Mhm.
Exile has always been a form of death. And so it's been like, it's been the world of death, you know, it's
Mhm.
been the world of exile and death and
Or
Die,
the
yeah.
original.
yeah, you will die. So, and we've described it in terms of like, well, they died spiritually,
Mhm.
but really the way the Bible describes it as exile.
A separation.
Yeah, that's separation. So when you get to like the story of Jonah, and we did Jonah together, right? You had Jonah exiling himself from the presence of God. He ran from the presence of God.
Mhm.
He's like exiling himself, and he goes away from the presence. He goes down. He goes down to Joppa, and then he goes down into a ship. Then he's kicked off the ship, and he goes down into the waters. And then and so you're like in your mind, you're going, wow, he is far away from the presence of God, right? Or you try to be. And then while he's down there, he writes the song, which is all about like how the gates of Hades and Clodums and the Sheol, I should say, you know, it's like he experienced like death, like it was death, you know. Well, we know that he survived physically, you know, and when you see like on the catacombs of early Christians, they often have a picture of Jonah being spit out by the chaos monster onto dry land. It's like, and it became kind of like this meme, right? Like where, like what you know, like Jonah, death couldn't hold him because death couldn't hold Christ. Christ had said, like Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so will the Son of Man be in the middle of the earth, right? So he's comparing his death to Jonah's quote unquote death, but it's the ultimate exile. So when Jesus is in the garden, he's talking about his exile already having begun. You count from Friday to Sunday, it's not 3 days. You count from the garden to
Thursday night.
then you're talking about 3 days. And he's already like on the cross, he's already talking like David did, you know, like, Lord, my God, why have you forsaken me? And he goes, and you have all these themes of, you know, like that he's already in the throes of death. And David, when he's like being chased by his enemies and everything, he describes it as a death. It's like, I've been exiled away from my people. I'm like out here in a foreign land, and blah blah blah. And he's talking about, like he's talking about it like Hades and exile and all this kind of stuff. It's always kind of like blended together. So like, to use our language, I would say that exile and death, it's a spectrum.
It's interesting because Jesus in Gethsemane started bleeding, right? Like he was so stressed out that the life started flowing from him. Like he started, and you could say if you bled to death, the first drop of blood, you started to die, you know?
Yeah, well, he already says my hour is here. You know, my hour is begun. So it's his time of exile and death. But like his death is not just described as the taking his last breath, and you know, it's the whole experience, because it's been that way with the Bible ever since Adam. That day he died, he was exiled, and you know, and he lived 600 some more years and then died. But he was dead the moment that he was cast out of God's direct presence. And we've all been walking dead in a sense. And we've all been in exile. That's like once you see that, then like a lot of verses, like the whole approach that Paul takes to the law of sin and death, and you know, and all that kind of stuff. and the idea of exiles. It's like, it's just so intertwined with each other. There's a real flow to it.
It's like weird. You could do some study where you take all the things from the Bible, Eden, like that's God's intention, exile. It's almost like, I feel like in the last year of my life, I've seen there's only like 5 different things almost, or not to be limiting, but it's like the same different stories or principles throughout the whole Bible, like just over and over and over again, like exile, redemption, getting
Yeah.
back to God's original intent. Like, it's really not that many different ideas, you know what I mean? It's crazy. Yeah, it's like one big story. Yeah, it's really crazy.
One big story that reflects the last story, and
Yeah.
it all of the Old Testament stories, I think you're going to find the language tying back to the first couple pages of Genesis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we're in Revelation right now, and this
Yeah.
stuff in Hebrews, it's all like so much more intertwined than I just see it.
Yeah. Part of it's that got translated into English, and I think, like, I don't speak Hebrew, but like I noticed that it's a lot of these repetitions of the words that, like, people who speak Hebrew, when they read English Bibles for the first time, they're like, "What is this?" You know?
Maybe it was a friend. And the first time she read. Because it's like that. It's a lot of repetition.
In ours, you
There's a
mean?
beauty to it. No, it's a Torah. In Hebrew.
It's like poetic rhythm.
Yeah, that's one thing that's interesting about language is you can't get the rhyme and meter, like A B whatever. You can't just directly translate stuff like Spanish and English. That's my language I would know the most of. You can't really translate a poem from English to Spanish and get it to all rhyme the same way with the same amount of syllables and meter and stuff. Is that kind of what they're saying? You know,
I
like,
think so. Evan can describe it so much better.
yeah, like
I'm like, yeah.
I could take something from an English poem and I could translate it into Spanish, but if the original way it was written in English was 12 syllables and then 17 and then 12 and then 17, the direct translation isn't going to go that way into Spanish. It's going to be a little longer here, a little shorter there, or like, and so you are going to miss the, like, sometimes I've thought about that as songs. I'm like, dude, this does not rhyme very well. Like, or it almost rhymes, but then it doesn't, or like, this bar is too long compared to this part, but it's because it just like, or I'm like, dang, if they would have said it like this, it would have flowed better. But I guess it's kind of like the translation. There's, yeah.
So one time, Evan transliterated like the Noah, this passage from the Noah story into kind of like from Hebrew into English, and you get this like, and and rest. Noah means rest.
That's his name. What it means?
Yeah, like means name rest because he was bringing rest to his people. Wow, and then the ark rests Noah on Mount Ararat. It's like all these. You see Noah.
Oh,
rest.
in English we use his name and we use
Yeah,
rest.
like like the bird flies, but couldn't find a place to Noah.
To rest.
It's like all these.
Oh,
Yeah, exactly. So and then you have like this kind of like the like these crying rain. It rained, but it's like the words are like crying, and it's like, and it cried on the earth, and it's like all these things that like you're like, wow, there's this like that, it almost like you could see why we translate it the way we do, because some of it wouldn't make direct sense. But if you know the story already and you just kind of use some of those words, the ideas, then you're like, wow, it adds like a whole really cool dimension to the story.
I always wonder like if Psalms in Hebrew sounds way cooler or like
I'm sure it
like-
does, yeah.
Or cooler, that sounds like such a dumb word. Like it sounds more beautiful, like, because I'm like sometimes, yeah, that's really interesting. Or like in Greek, they have 5 different words for the word love. In English, we just have one, you know, and we add an adjective to it, oh, brotherly love or whatever, parental love. Where in the original Hebrew or Greek, they could have just written it out.
Mhm.
It might have flowed way better.
Right.
You had to just learn Hebrew. You're like somebody who reads and learns all the time.
You know what I like to do? I just,
I'll
I just like to know a guy that knows Hebrew. That's what I do.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but I can tell
Hang out
that
with
there's
Evan.
a nostalgia feeling, like something that should.
I'm gonna go on a trip to Israel. Like, I'm gonna bring home a beautiful, lovely Israeli wife that speaks Hebrew. How about that?
You're gonna have to learn it though. There's a book right there that you and I can learn together, because Evan brought it down so I could learn it, but I need a teacher.
See, I know
He said
that, that's
there's
good
YouTube
enough. I know
videos.
somebody, you know?
I want him to teach me, and his answer is there's YouTube videos.
Well, that's not what we told him when he wanted to play, learn how to play piano.
I know I taught him the piano, but he didn't, he wasn't a good student.
It's the worst trying to teach.
Because he
your
was
own
young
family.
and he was like, I just want, and then, but he's like a better piano player than I am. It didn't actually take him long to be a better.
He's a very studious person though. That's like his personality.
Yeah. Anyway,
Very cool. Yeah, I
I
never,
keep on thinking about, sorry.
no, I just talked to him.
Okay, I keep on thinking, if this, chapter keeps on reverberating in my mind, in my heart, like. I feel like I have to repent of those times when I say, isn't God faithful? When it's because something I prayed for is answered, or everything's going right, or things are just so. Because that's not how you measure his faithfulness,
Mhm.
right? Because we see that here.
But it's sometimes it's how we learn God's faithfulness.
I know, but it's just not something that you can be like. I mean, what if we spent our whole life in hiding, like, let's say we're in the Holocaust time or whatever. Or like the Iranian Christians right now. And all we knew was trouble. Right? And does that mean that we can just now say, well, God must not be faithful? Because that's not how you measure those things.
That's not the right type of metric to be doing.
Right.
but,
And so I just feel like,
And where did they get their faith from, you know?
yeah,
But you know, but you also have like these stories from places like that, like where it's like ridiculous miracles.
oh, yeah. Right, but, you know, like, hey, I got you hear this kind of language, though. You hear it from way too many pulpits. It's like very, like the amount of prosperity with, you know, like the things you accumulate, like I got a new car, got a new house, I got like this and that, my kids are doing great. All of these things, and isn't God faithful? Like, didn't he do it? And it's like, yeah, we can, obviously, everything is like for his glory, and yeah, we need to give him everything. But then it's just like I see this in like Christians that I know personally who tend to think like God's forgotten me because I'm not married yet. Or
Like, what about the
I
person
don't
that just
have the
got
things I
decapitated somewhere?
want, or the things I've asked for, the desires of my heart. And then they just think that he must not be faithful to them. Like, it's just something that we have to be careful of. Right,
Well,
and
like where you always equate God's faithfulness with good things happening.
Yeah.
You know, like where, and then when things go bad, then you're going, where is God's faithfulness?
Right.
Or, you know,
Or like, I've been using this example, I've really got this a lot from going to the men's and hearing how we ask for prayer requests. Like some guy will say, oh, my job's doing big layoffs, so if everyone could pray that I don't get laid off. So we're setting the standard of that so-and-so's trust is gonna be connected to God if he gets laid off or not. But I'm like, well, how do you know God doesn't want you to get a different job that's better? So like if the guy doesn't get laid off, he'll be like, oh man, my trust is renewed in God because I wasn't part of the layoff. But it's kind of like along the lines of what you're saying, well, what if so we told God, hey, God, here's the answer, and if you do what I think you should do,
Yeah.
then I'll say you're faithful. But it's kind of like, well, what if you did lose that job?
Right.
Like, it's kind of like along the same
Yeah.
lines what you're saying,
Like,
kind of.
yeah, in that
Yeah.
case, you should be praying for his will, right?
Like, what if God wants that job out of your life so he can give you a better one?
Mhm.
But I do
But-
think that sometimes like, you're like, you know, like, God, I'm going to pray that like, I don't lose my job.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have a
And,
hard-
you know, because that's my request.
Mhm.
But if I lose my job, he's still faithful, and I'm like, okay, God, that wasn't in your plans.
Right.
There's something else, you know.
Right,
I
and
trust
that's
you.
where you're trusting him, yep.
Right. So I don't think. Yeah, it depends on like where you're coming from. It's
It's
kind
like
of
your heart.
yeah, because I think there's things that I think we have the privilege to pray for whatever we want.
Yeah,
But you know, like Paul was like, God, remove this thorn from my side 3 times. But then God finally gives us, no, I'm not going to do that. You
mhm,
know, but he does, but he has the privilege of asking for that to be removed.
Because what is the verse? I don't know. It says, you know, you do not
You don't
see
have
because you not.
To ask, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and those seem very conflicting, at least in
Yeah.
my mind,
Mm.
words. So, I mean, like when we pray men's, what I end up doing when I have the prayer, it's like, you know, I'm listening, well, I want to have this. And I always bring it back to, this is what we're praying about here. Like give us that understanding. You know, whatever we will, accept that. It's really hard to accept. Like, that's my own, I'm like, this, but really, man. You just understand it. It's the hardest thing. I don't know what you guys- That's the hardest thing in the world.
It's sometimes I feel like we want the end goal, but we think we know the path, so we ask for this path. Sometimes, like we don't see the path. Like the Israelites, they wandered through they ended up in the promised land
Mhm.
and praying for the promised land. They were right in praying for that, let's say, but sometimes we pray for the path, like God, I'll figure out how to do it. Can you make it happen this way? And that's not.
Yeah.
Well, but if somebody's gonna lose their home, I mean, of course, the prayer's gonna be
Keep their own.
keep it out. I mean, there's a story I told somebody yesterday about a man who worked for.
Oh,
No.
McDonald Douglas.
Anyway, it's, I mean, he's not a super intelligent guy, he's very hard work, right? If you have the answer, and this is what he now had to get the bill, he made $3,000 a day. You know, not an old guy, he's like 40, 42, but you hear the story that happened, because it's like, his bill. A $3 million home, week, a wife, incredible job. Well, this man did his work. This is, I mean, he did not. So he came into that, you know. So he said he was experienced. What, I mean, he talked about. He said, look, with my youth, he talked about. Why? With my chest. And she would tell him, I'm working, I'm working. So he's very upset about having. He just said, or she's. I guess she's thinking about this at that time. She wants to, I got it. This is all real world versus. And this is what he said, yeah, this is after this. So. That's just, I'm going to teach you about it. And he's already getting, at this point, right away, of course. And something's happened, you're already drinking heavily, and you're looking like you're going to lose his hands. So he walks into recovery, his daughter's. And he said, what's wrong? You know, why are we here? And she said, "Dad, because I tried to tell you something." And he's like, that didn't make sense. Why? You have everything. He said, "You have everything. You have a house. You have everything you ever want." She said, "No, all you do is work. I don't have you. I never have you." And he looked at her and said, "You have everything. This is what I work for. So you guys have everything." She said, "We've been asking. I've been asking. I've been asking for years and years. I don't want to live in this earth anymore. I'm not going to spend time. This is why she came out. She tried to listen to that potion. She got it up. And that's what he came in to meet and say. As much as he thought on the surface of everything was right, was living, he got divorced, lost the house, he's homeless. Literally, he at that point was living out of his car. Yet his daughter is a, and that's what he said, I have to. And so to God, he doesn't know what God is, but he's like, clearly. So once that happened, his wife is speaking to him. I don't know if the house will mean that stuff, but that's, you know what I mean? It's a very difficult thing. How do you go on this earth and say, you give it to God, we're taught to acquire, conquer. And multiply. Yeah. I mean, so it's, you know, and like what he said, I mean, there's got to be some God because my daughter did not die.
That's his highest stasis. Right?
Hypostasis.
Is that what it's called?
I think, you know, I could probably some Greek scholars like
Well, like-
shaking their head.
Well, like that's his basis for his faith. Like my daughter didn't die, so that's my like for him that was just like there must be a God kind of right.
I don't know.
Absolutely, you know,
This is not